All right, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our event today. We have a panelist today that we'll be talking about. Our topic for today will be living beyond childhood trauma and incarceration. And so I'm going to be introducing Dr. Camille Gibson in just a moment. And thank everyone for being here. We really do appreciate your presence here, coming from very, very far and very, very near. So just give me a moment here. And okay, I'm going to introduce Dr. Camille Gibson, which will be our moderator for today. So she is Executive Director of Texas Juvenile Crime and Prevention Center and Interim Dean of the College of Juvenile Justice at Prairie A&M University. She is a nationally certified rehabilitation counselor and author of the book, Juvenile Sex Offenders: What the Public Needs to Know. Her work, spanning decades, has included hearing directly from youth who have experienced the justice system in the United States and the Caribbean and about their atrocities, into delinquency. Much of these have included experiences of chronic trauma, and she began in higher education teaching at Brooklyn College in political science. And concurrently at John Jay College in Public Administration, an accomplished academic. Her professional contributions have included elected service on the board of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences and the presidency of Southwestern Association of Criminal Justice. She has been recognized with a Felix Fabian Award and a Nethofer Fellowship. Everybody welcome Dr. Camille Gibson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to this panel presentation sponsored by the Texas Juvenile Crime Prevention Center and the College of Juvenile Justice, and co-sponsored by the College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Sources Extension, largely in the person of Mr. Alberto Alfredo over there. Thank you so much, sir. Joining me on the dais today, we have immediately to my left, Miss Mary Mamou. Miss Mary Mamou is a native of Lafayette, Louisiana, who noticed that there was a void that needed to be filled. And so in 2022, with her son, she started a program called PATES, P-A-T-E-S, to educate youth and parents and other adults on situations where children could be at risk at various genders, with the intention of making children aware of dangers and parents aware of dangers, so that we can do a better job of keeping our youngsters from victimization. She believes that sexual assault programs are lacking two crucial roles: that education of young people on signs and alerts, and also a need for programs paying attention especially to male victims of sexual assault, while not ignoring the many females who are also victimized. Next to Ms. Mamou is Dr. Nicole Lynette. Nicole Lynette is a native of Houston, Texas. She's currently a nonprofit CEO, a media personality, and producer with over 3 decades in ministerial work. Her bachelor's degree is in Nouthetic Counseling, and her doctorate in theology is from Penn Faith Biblical Studies Institute. She has been involved in a number of programs with victims of various sorts of trauma, involved in addressing human trafficking. She's a certified life coach. She's the founder and executive director of Resuscitate, a nonprofit in Houston that addresses child abuse and related trauma. A survivor and a thriver, she serves as a person of vision and hope. So we are certainly delighted to have Dr. Nicole Lynette here with us today. And then next to Dr. Lynette Nicole is Mr. David Garlock. Mr. Garlock is a successful returning citizen, re-entry professional, and criminal justice reform advocate, interested and passionate about educating the next generation of justice professionals. He is a writer, an author, a poet, and he's been on the board of numerous nonprofits, along with being a frequent speaker at colleges and universities. He was featured in the movie Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson film, in 2020, and he presented a TEDx at Arcadia in April of 2022. And then finally on the dais today, Sarah Steele, who's an assistant professor right here in the college. She came to us this year as a faculty member from the University of Nebraska. Her research includes community responses to crime and justice issues. Her specialty is the misconduct of priests. And she focuses on the impact of the justice system on persons who have been through the system. Her research has been published in Deviant Behavior and American Journal of Criminal Justice. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guests today. The goal of the panel today is to understand the impact of chronic and acute trauma on children in particular, and what can potentially happen when we adults fall a bit short in recognizing the signs or preparing our youngsters for the risk of harm and the trauma that can occur. Consequences we know include suicide, substance abuse, adverse circumstances, anger, depression, aggression, and getting into problems with the justice system. After we talk about what chronic trauma is, we'll talk about how to overcome and to thrive. And so we'll hear from our panelists, and as time allows, we'll have questions from the audience. I'll start with these comments. The National Council for Behavioral Health reports that 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some sort of trauma at least once in their life. That's over 200 million of the 300 million of us in the United States. All children who witness a homicide, a sexual assault, and 90% of those who have experienced sexual abuse, and 77% of those who have experienced a school shooting. Now remember, there are several school shootings. Not all of them are mass shootings, but there are several school shootings, and most often involved are persons of color. Many of these young people exposed to this, and 35% of urban youth, have some sort of traumatic stress disorder response from this exposure to violence. Here in Texas, we have a very diverse group of children. We have a number of children who are from different parts of the world. Many of them are places in the Middle East, South America, where they're dealing with war conditions, violence, medical trauma, neglect, abuse, accidents, natural disasters that have brought them to the United States, and especially if we think of Texas. The NIH have alerted us that exposure to trauma elevates the level of psychopathy when people become adults. By psychopathy, ladies and gentlemen, a lack of empathy and hurting people, hurting other people. So an increase in that when people have trauma that's unaddressed. Among incarcerated men, those who have experienced sexual trauma are twice as likely to be depressed and 1.5 times more likely to suffer from anxiety and get involved with substances. And we know that a majority of women in the justice system have been victims of abuse. The numbers vary. There are a number of different numbers out there, but the range tends to be 56% and above of women in the justice system. So we're talking about a very serious problem here. And so we'll see what light our panel will shed for us today. So I'll start with Ms. Mamou and David Garlock. If you would tell us something about your experience with trauma and where it led.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary. Tell a little bit of my story. Between the ages of 11 and 13, I was sexually assaulted and molested by my step-cousin that lived in a home with me. No, for 2 years I did not tell. I ended up how it came about. I'm kind of going quick. No, we have time, how it came about, where it came out is that I became pregnant. I got pregnant by him at the age of 13 years old. He molested me in the home. He came back and forth and lived with us for 2 years constantly. And a lot of people may say, but where was your parents? My parents was in the home. My parents was there. In due time, things happened. I did get pregnant at 13. I ended up putting my son for adoption. I was 13 years old, and then once he went into adoption, of course, I had no contact with him. So at the age of 13, I'd already had a son, put him up for adoption. He was already gone, and he was disappeared. The gentleman did go to jail. So at that point, I was going to my 8th grade year. So at the age of 13, going into 8th grade year, I've already had a son and experienced life what now as adults we go through right now, and I didn't have him at the time with me. At the age of, once he turned 18, which is my son, I started looking for him. Started finding my son, looking things that I need to do to find him. So I did. I found my son at 18. I did find my son. Long story short, we have a beautiful relationship. Everything is really nice with us. I'm really, really close with his family. I didn't know his family. I didn't know who adopted him. I picked out the family, but it's certain things that I went through is the reason why I picked the family. I picked the family of another race. I did not pick a black family. It was for a purpose and a reason, because my thing was I have to find my son. And the only way, I'm finna cry. The only way for me to find him, I need him to know he wasn't adopted. He was adopted. I need him to think that's his family. Even though it is his family, I needed him to know he had another family. So I did find my son at 18 years old. We beautiful family now. I wrote a book. We have an organization where we come out. We talk to kids. We talk to adults. We talk to parents. And I found at a lot of times, I did go to counseling, but I didn't give up everything. I was like, I'm not talking to you. I'm not going to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you because you don't feel what I feel. And if you can't connect with me, you don't understand what I went through. You don't understand me giving my son up. You don't understand me having been molested by a family member. You don't understand family members blaming me for the family being broke apart. So it's certain things that you go through in life, that trauma, you don't want to get close to people. You want to stay away from people. And I just want y'all to know, things that happen when you're young or when you're a child or when you go through life, it doesn't make you to the adult that you are. You can choose, okay, I'm not gonna be this way. I'm not gonna be this circumstance. I'm not gonna be this statistic. So just understand that in life, things happen, but sometimes things happen for the best. One thing that I remember my son telling me that his adopted parents told him, because he's different, he was raised by a white family, he's black. Well, what's making me so different? Why I don't look like y'all? And his mother told him, bad things happen, but the good things can come out of it. So just know in life, everything what happened to y'all in the past, what happened to your family as a kid, that doesn't bring everything that happened as an adult. You can change it around just like that. So I'm here if you have any questions. I'm sorry if I took too much time. If y'all have any questions for me, I'm very open. I'm willing to talk, and my name is Mary. I'm here.
And I am David Garlock. My story started around the same age, 11 years old. That's when the sexual abuse began with me. It was a non-family member, and the abuse went on for 8 years. When it first happened, when I was 11 years old, it happened in the basement of the place this non-family member lived. And when it began, and it was over that first time, he pulled me to the side and told me if I ever told anybody that he would kill me and my family. So from that moment on, during that 8-year period, I created masks. That's how I got through the trauma. The psychology calls it disassociation. So I had a mask for when I was at school. I had a mask when I was at church. I had a mask when I was doing anything, and no one could know about what was going on. Towards the end of the abuse, it became more physical. This gentleman beat my brother up and I just about every night. He tried to kill us numerous times. So when I was 19 and my brother was 22, we made an irrational decision and we took the gentleman's life. 4 months later, I was arrested at 20 years old in Alabama. At that point, I thought I was going to get the death penalty or life without parole because it's the dirty South and that's how they do things in Alabama. A couple of days after I was arrested, I was taken over to questioning and sat in an interrogation room for 7 hours, thinking about the murder, thinking about everything that transpired, and I finally confessed to the crime. This was the first time that I'd ever told anybody about the abuse, the first time I'd ever told anybody about the murder. And this was one of the first things where I was able to take the mask off. The second thing happened on the way back to the county jail. I'm asking the detective, am I going to get the death penalty? Am I going to get life without parole? And he turns to me, he's like, do you believe in God? I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty or life without parole? He's like, do you believe in God? Finally, I was like, yeah, I believe in God. And he's like, you need to seek him now. That conversation was the second thing that helped me take the mask off. And the third thing was when I was in prison, I was in a behavior modification program class. And a lot of the programs in prison aren't really run properly, but if you want to work on yourself and rehabilitate yourself, you can. And I was reading this book about child sexual abuse, and it got to a point where it talks about people who are sexually abused as children blame themselves for the abuse. And here I was able to have this conversation with 11-year-old David and tell him it's not your fault. And that was the third thing that was able to allow me to take the mask off. And during my incarceration, so I got a 25-year sentence. I spent 13 and a half years in prison. And throughout my incarceration, I was doing things to better myself and improve myself because I wanted to be a different David Garlock when I got out of prison than I went in. I've been out over 10 years now. I got a pardon from Alabama in 2021, and I love the opportunities to come to universities across the country and speak about my story and to help educate. And what's always amazing is just about everywhere I speak, there's one person that comes up to me afterwards and talks about their own abuse because they've been empowered because I was able to share so openly, and I tell them, I'm like, forget the 100 or 1,000 people that are here. You are the reason that I'm here.
Professor Steele, if you would share with us something about the dynamics of childhood and sexual abuse, and I'm thinking especially given your work with children who've been the victims of ministers. What are some things that tend to be common about the circumstances and things that may have been missed? And I'll get back to the other panelists about that question.
Yeah, so trauma can encompass a wide variety of different experiences. And one of the common ways that it's measured is by looking at adverse childhood experiences. And these experiences can be neglect, they can be abuse, but generally we know that individuals who experience these types of traumatic events growing up, it can affect them later on in their life. And so it's interesting because whenever this trauma isn't dealt with, as you progress throughout your life, it can actually become more complex and maladaptive, essentially. And so some of the ways that this can transpire ultimately is by engaging in antisocial behaviors such as violence, such as other manifestations, poor performance at work, etc. And so it's really important that we're able to locate individuals who have experienced these traumatic events, and then we're able to then help them have services that are catered to addressing their individual needs that started in childhood and have progressed throughout their lives.
Okay, thank you. For Mr. Garlock, Ms. Mabu, if you would tell us where were the gaps in terms of, and not to blame anyone, but where were the gaps in terms of your protection, or what could have made a difference in your experiences? What do you say to that?
Well, with my experience is really, when we think about adverse childhood experiences, I scored 10 out of 10, and so I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. My parents were divorced at the time that this abuse was going on. My sister and brother had already been kicked out of the house, and that was one of the reasons where this individual had access to my brother in the beginning. And my dad he was present physically, but that was the only way. I'd say also really education about child sexual abuse. I mean, back in the 90s, this isn't something that we discussed and had conversations about. And I mean, really, when you think about 2023, they're not having the right conversations and being able to educate and share with kids, you know, what happens when somebody's trying to groom you. And so that's really where we have to get to. When I was in the county jail, my mom found out that we were arrested with a friend, found us on the internet and said, your boys are locked up for murder. So she reached out to us, and probably the fourth or fifth letter, she wanted us to write her a letter and tell her about what happened, because she had thought things were going on, but she never asked, you know. And so we wrote her a 30-page letter front and back about the abuse. And when she was responding to us, she had finished my letter and was halfway through my brother's letter and died of a massive heart attack at 46. And just thinking that, you know, she had a bad heart anyway, but what we had experienced and her not knowing really just tore her up, you know. And just thinking about the necessity of parents having conversations with their kids about the potentials of abuse, and that 95% of sexual abuse happens by somebody the person knows.
Ms. Mahmood?
I think with mine was a little different. My mom and dad was married. They was together. So we always was together. And I think with me it was so much trust. Like, we keep family together, everything is good, everything is okay. So like I said, this was my step cousin. This when I say that mom and dad was together, I consider my stepdad my father. So that was his cousin, and they was really close. We're a family from Louisiana where we stick together. So he'll come in, he'll come in and work, and he'll stay with us. In the room for us, I had a huge room, like imagine 2 rooms, no wall. So we had 2 queen beds in that room. So when he come, his family, of course, he stay in the other bed, I stay in the other bed. And that's how it was. I think what the gap was it was the trust. It was so much trust. Oh, their family member, they ain't not gonna touch my daughter, or they not gonna do nothing, because they family. It was so much trust. So it was a lot opposite for everyone else. My family was they family. He can stay in a room, they can be together, and he gained their trust. My mom considered him as a son. So my mom looked at him as a son. When my mom had cancer, he was there at the hospital, but then at night he'd come and molest me. So he gained that trust from them, and it's just so much of not listening. I honestly, truly thought for years my parents knew, because ain't no way you can not know that I'm in the same house, I'm being molested, you don't hear me crying, you don't hear me screaming, you don't hear me this, you don't hear me that. It's no way. So it was so much trust that he built that trust to family where they was just thought like, he can be with us, so he can go out, we can go out of town and he can stay with them. They can just stay with them. It was so much trust. I think the awareness of talking to your kids, like parents have to talk. I know sometimes it's uncomfortable. I have twins right now, 9 years old. I talk to them about everything, any and everything. So it's about communicating with them, letting them know if you do come talk to me, even if you feel you're gonna get in trouble, you cannot show them, oh, I'm mad at you, because they're not gonna be open to you no more. They're gonna be like, oh, when I tell mom or I tell dad they're gonna get mad at me. So you just have to have that open communication. I think it lacks when my family wasn't communication. As our generation or our culture is, you keep everything in-house. You don't tell nobody, you don't let nobody know what's going on in this family, you don't let nobody go what's going on this roof, under this roof. So that's what the lack for me and my family was. Nobody wanted to talk. Even after it happened and he went to jail, nobody wanted to talk about it. I did not talk about it. My best friend, we became best friends when I was 13 years old. From the time I was 13 and I found my son at 33, 32, she did not know I had a son. She had never knew I was molested. She did not know I was, nobody knew because nobody talked to me about it after that. So it's about communication, like communicating with your family. Don't get angry because at that point they feel guilt already. So just communicating with your sisters, your brothers, your cousins, your nieces, just communicate with everyone. And I think that's the lack that we have is no one wants to talk about it. And because everyone feel like they want to get hurt or no one wants to be blamed. It's no blame game. Just the person who did it, but it's just no talk. Everybody just need to talk to one another, and it'd be good.
Thank you. And Dr. Lynette, you've seen a lot of this victimization with trafficking and trauma. What are you hearing are the gaps?
Well, my fellow panelists have shared a lot of the gaps. One is lack of education. Because if we're not equipped, we're not exempt, meaning this is not new. Sexual abuse of children have been happening for centuries. And as she just stated, there's a lack of communication. And it's because of the risk, I believe it's the fear of the risk of liability. The fear of the risk of liability of our family name, the fear of risk of liability of our institutions, and we focus more on pride and image rather than the protection and the safety of children and the families. Breaking the silence, and I hear you saying just talk, but being a survivor, thriver myself, it's hard to talk to people you don't trust. And finding that trusted adult, or like you say, that trusted friend that will actually, in a lot of cases, we've seen where the victim shared it with a cousin or shared it with someone, and they shared it with a trusted adult. And that's how they were able to get the help that they needed. But when we have generational traumas that are cycling from generation to generation, and you have the aunt that's been abused, and the parents, and believe it or not, there are parents that have experienced sexual abuse as children, and their trauma was unresolved. So if their child is now trying to come to them, or they may have heard it, and immediately they're triggered, and they're no longer in a position, it's not giving an excuse, but we have to understand how trauma works. And then they're standing there, and that unresolved trauma, let's just say if they were abused at the age of 6, has now, those feelings have come up all over again, and they're paralyzed. And so they begin to ignore. And if I may, can I give an example? There was a protest taking place at a high school campus, and I heard about it on television. And when I heard the young lady say, I just want to go to school, but now I'm afraid, I knew I needed to take a field trip there. But went to the school, talked about the services we provide through our organization, great meeting, and I had an agenda when I was leaving there. You know, I have life that I do. But I heard a young lady screaming to the top of her voice. She was like, F you, to the top of her lungs. And I went to her because that was a little concerning for me, and to find out that she was talking to her mother. And being a little old school, I was like, whoa, that's your mama, girl. Like, what's really going on? No judgment here. And I de-escalated her, and then the mom came over, and of course, now I have to de-escalate mama. Long story short, the young girl, the student, she was an 11th grader, she was upset because there was an allegation of a 16-year-old being sexually abused by a coach. And she took heart to this so seriously. So mom was upset, and mom said, well, it's not that the coach pinned her down. And at that point, I felt that was a moment of ignorance. So I asked Mom to come to the side, and I said, well, Mom, you know, we have to be very careful about commenting about things we don't have experience with. And at that point, Mom said, well, I'm gonna say this to you. You're the first one I've ever said it to, but I have very much experience with that. And she admitted she was gang raped in the 9th grade. And it was the first time she shared that information. And so, you know, I just told her, well, then you understand, you know, your daughter's plight. Come to the daughter, we talked. She still didn't know what happened to her mom. And the daughter was so adamant and so angry. And when I looked in her eyes and I talked with the daughter, with the permission of her mom, and I asked her, I said, have you ever been sexually abused? And she told me yes. I thought it was, you know, around the same time, but it was when she was in the 7th grade. And no one addressed her. She told the teachers did not respond to her. They didn't believe her. She told her mom, for whatever reason, Mom didn't hear her. But when both of them came together, she agreed to share it with her mom again, and she did. Mom was oblivious, she was a wreck. But I asked Mom to share her experience. At that moment, then peace came in that home. What am I saying? A lot of the trauma that is happening from generation to generation is cyclic trauma. Mom thought the best way to protect her daughter was to be overprotective, to be controlling, and maybe it would never happen to her, and to never, like you just stated, never speak of it. But as a result, the silence did not place her daughter in a better position for protection. So so what I want to share is this. The gap is, again, and I'm just reiterating, we have to break the silence, because on average, a molester, on average, can molest up to 150 plus kids if they're never caught. That's one molester. So today, I don't know who you are. I know my parents, when I begin to share my story, I just began to share my story when I started my organization 3 years ago. And my parents wanted to know, why didn't I come to them? And sometimes as parents, I don't know how many parents we have in here, sometimes we think we're the most trusted adults, but we're not trusted, because if we're angry about everything else besides that, why would a child come to us about something so, detrimental? So the gap, communication is everything. We have to be educated. And just to be fair, I want to say this. We talked a lot about grooming with her situation. You know, the parents thought he was trustworthy, thought he was a good guy. Just to be fair, perpetrators are very, very good at placing themselves in positions of trust. And if you don't know the signs of abuse, or you don't know the signs, which one of the things we teach, the signs of a potential perpetrator, if you don't know what that looks like, then you may not be able to intervene. And if we're not talking to young people and saying, hey, look out for this, look out for that, these are signs of the potential perpetrator, not what it looks like when you are abused, but how can we prevent you from ever having that experience altogether? So we want to share our experiences with you, but prayerfully and hopefully through education and raising awareness, we can also teach signs of what it looks like for a potential perpetrator, so that we can prevent this cycle from continuing.
If you would share with us some of those signs of a potential perpetrator.
Well, thank you for asking. I brought that with me. Well, one of the signs is this, that that adult, she had a perfect example. The perpetrator interjects themselves in positions where they are constantly volunteering to look after your children. Don't worry about it, we have it. There was a teacher, one of the perpetrator, one of the signs at one of the schools where he was indicted for molesting about 12 children. One of the signs there was he was always at the parents' homes, interjecting, stating, he wanted to get to know the parents, and also gifts. And I know we all like to feel special, right? Right? We like to feel extra special. You have to be very careful because perpetrators look and see if, let's just say, if your parents can't afford to get you some items, and they'll interject and say, you know what, don't worry about it, I'll take care of that for you. Now, the truth is, you have some genuine people that want to help you. But if you're being isolated out of a group of young people or individuals by one particular person, you have to ask yourself, and I know this is going to mess with some egos, you have to ask yourself, what makes me so special? Why am I the one they're always looking after? Then they're always trying to find ways to get you alone. And you have to be very careful because, I don't know how to say this in this generation, but, well, it's not just this generation, many generations, where you have the older age group looking at the younger women, and the younger men are feeling good about having an older woman, and that may make you feel good, but that's actually abuse, because when you have an older, and I'm gonna just say it, because back in our day, can we just be frank on here? You know, people like sugar daddies. Okay, let's just be real. But a lot of times when you find yourself in that type of position, they found a vulnerability with you. And that vulnerability feeling like you're not special, so they're trying to make you feel special. And it's really self-motivated. It's all about self-gratification. And also you have to be careful. I talked about alone time and being overly interested in you, but just constantly wanting to get you off by themselves. And parents, I want to say, if you're watching, be careful about people who are overzealous for looking out after your children. Because we think about young people being groomed, but parents and the caregivers get groomed so that they can gain access to the young people. And another thing, when young people are feeling, they're at the age where they don't want to listen to their parents, and sometimes they want to run away from home. If someone is so eager to bring you into their home, think about it again. You need to ask yourself, why are they so quick to bring me to their home, especially if they don't know anything about you? So I don't know if that helps.
Okay, thank you. What are the needs of persons who are in the systems? Thinking about those who have had contact with the justice system and they're trying to move forward, what do they need? Because we know that a number of persons don't get what they need to get while they have contact with the system. So considering the trauma that many people go through, what do they need?
I can say so. You know, there's a correlation between these adverse childhood experiences and not just system involvement, but also involvement in other child welfare institutions as well as different adverse health outcomes. So it's very important to create a comprehensive culture that's addressing all of these different issues. So individuals who might be more likely to come in to be incarcerated in the system later on might express earlier symptoms in the system in terms of like ADHD, or they might have asthma. They find that there's a high increase of asthma among people who've had these adverse childhood experiences. So creating a stronger environment to address these issues before it comes to system involvement is very important, as well as creating a broader culture within the system that's more targeted at preventing trauma. Cognitive behavioral therapy is something that is often used, but as David spoke to in prison, it's not a very therapeutic environment. So in terms of making these systems more trauma-informed is very crucial for actually going to be preventing these problems manifesting negatively in later system involvement further on.
So to piggyback on that, I live in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is working on becoming trauma-informed. Now, this is statewide. This isn't just schools. This isn't just hospitals. This is the Department of Corrections. This is policing. This is judges. This is probation, parole, and that is something that's necessary countrywide. To think about it, you know, you have somebody that has been sexually abused, assaulted, molested as a kid. That is very traumatic. Then they do something to get arrested. That arrest is traumatic. Then they have to go to trial, which is traumatic. Then they go to the county jail, which is traumatic. Then they go to prison, which is traumatic. And then what they see in prison is traumatic. And there's really no place within the correctional system for somebody to get the assistance that they need. In the 13 and a half years that I was incarcerated, I went and saw a psychiatrist one time. I was there for 1 hour. 55 minutes of that 1 hour, he was dissecting this picture on his wall to me. And 5 minutes was him getting to know me. So right then, I knew that this was not going to be beneficial for me. When I got out of prison, that's when I actually started seeing a counselor, and providing counselors that can understand, that have a good understanding and knowledge of trauma, CBT, and other things to help a person work through that adverse childhood experience is necessary. Not every counselor, not every psychologist has that ability. So you're going to need to find that person, that you can trust, that is open, that you feel comfortable and that you can be open with, because a lot of times with somebody that has experienced a lot of trauma, what they are is an onion. There's so many different layers that you have to peel away. As I said, I scored 10 out of 10 on the ACEs test. So neglect, my dad was alcoholic. I actually came down one time when he was trying to kill himself. So all these different things are layers that have to be peeled away where I can begin healing, and the thing that I always tell people is this, hurt people, but helped people help people, and healed people heal people.
Thank you. Tell us about voids that we need to be paying attention to. The panel, you've mentioned a need to educate parents, children, and communication. Anything else?
I think for me, I think schools, and I know that people say it's not the responsibilities of schools, but you have to think these kids are in schools majority of the times of the day. And I know it's kind of hard for me working with schools, younger kids. These younger kids are going through so much. And I think where the lack of the void of not being in the school districts and talking to these younger kids, high schools, they're a little open to it. Middle schools, elementaries, they not. So I think one of the voids for me that I found is the talking to these kids in the schools. If it's happening at home and they don't want to talk to their parents, the next best thing is these schools, these teachers, these coaches. You're involved with these kids all the time. So let's get more involved in the kids than dealing with schools and education like that.
Okay. I'm sorry, was there something else? Go ahead.
Yes, I was thinking, in addition, I just believe that all youth serving organizations should be required to have trauma-informed training, because adverse childhood experiences start young. And we have a program that addresses middle to high school age youth, but a lot of times, a lot of abuse has already taken place. And parents don't know how to address the matter. The institutions don't know how to address the matter, because most of the time we are reactive rather than proactive. And I believe that, yes, we need the intervention, but we need so much prevention. And the Centers of Disease Control actually shares that same information, that a lot of resources have been invested in, the intervention and the healing side, but not many resources is invested for prevention. And I believe that once we address the generational cycles of trauma and actually have these conversations, because if we don't talk about it, we're not going to do anything about it. And so I just believe that there should be a requirement for anyone in any youth serving organization to be trauma-informed and trained. And I'm just gonna put this out here, the school to prison pipeline, we need to address that. Because a lot of these, because where we see as in, I love your testimony. Once they're traumatized early in life, they begin to act out. At that point is where we need to begin to ask the right questions. That's when we need to find out what type of trauma these children and what type of ACEs these children are dealing with the hope that they don't progress to the criminal justice system. And then that will help reduce the recidivism. That will help reduce the numbers that are these children being arrested. We need to address their trauma instead of privatizing prisons and all of this to line pockets to put our children in.
Well, I would like to add to that. I wouldn't say that that is a school to prison pipeline. I call it the trauma to prison pipeline because that's where it really originates, you know, and that's where we need to look at, you know. And, you know, we have to have that openness, you know. And one thing, too, is, you know, especially with males, you know, we have to be able to talk to them, you know, because a lot of times there's such a different shame and stigma about being abused as a male than as far as a female, you know, because it's the whole masculinity thing, you know. How is somebody going to look at me when I tell them that I was sexually abused as an 11-year-old boy? You should have been able to do something. You should have been able to stop, you know. I was a child, you know, and those conversations have to happen. And looking at the hurt people, you know, 35 to 75% of people who have committed a sexual offense have been sexually abused themselves. So it's this generational thing, you know, and I always talk about it in this way, you know. As a child, this person who has molested you has some type of power or in a position of trust. So you get this distorted thought process that this person loves you, that this is how they're showing you love. And if that isn't challenged and you're not able to see that this is wrong, this is abuse, you're going to go through life thinking this is how you show love. So when you're an adult, you're going to show that love in that same way, but now you've actually committed a sexual assault or abuse. And that's really where we have to prevent it, you know, with talking with these kids, you know, and helping them heal and letting them know that it's not your fault. This happened to you, not because of you, you know, and begin that process of healing.
Can I say two more things?
Yes.
Just the stigmas, in addition with him, to add to him, two stigmas. A lot of youth are abused as from other youths, by other youths as well, not just adults. So, and another thing is women abuse too. A lot of times when we think about abuse, we think about a male on a male or a male on a female, but there are women that abuse, and it makes it even harder, especially for males to say, I was abused by a woman, a female. That has been shared, and men think, you know, some men say, hey, man, if she wanted you like that, you know, there should be a badge of honor. But boys, males, they feel violation just like females feel violations. So I just wanted to share that as well.
Okay. And I know some folks need to leave on the hour. We understand that. But question from the audience. Yes, sir.
Doing well. I think he's coming at the mic.
My name is Redmond Gordon, and I'm just sitting here and I'm listening. And the Jewish scientists did studies on their children and grandchildren since the Holocaust. And the Jewish scientists have found out that in the DNA of their children, the transgenerational trauma is in their genes. Why is it that we stop there and not go back to slavery? One of the greatest books I read by a young lady by the name of Joyce Ducree, and I hope your young people read this book on post-traumatic slave disorder. TYC right now have shut down several different juvenile facilities because of the staff raping the children. Texas prison system is one of the biggest camps to produce men for raping men because of the setup of the slavery mentality of how Texas prisons is set up. Until we go back and deal with, it's going to continuously affect the white families as well as the black families if we don't deal with why we wasn't treated after we came out of slavery.
Okay.
Am I missing something? Until
No.
we get, because today I see as I work with young people that a lot of young people that I ask that never knew their daddy, but their mama tell you you're just like your daddy. So it's something in their genes that have been passed from their grandfathers and their fathers to know that we are the worst enemy of ourselves, because the greatest hate that I see is in the black male from himself. And until we learn to love ourselves, we will always pass down this self-hate that we are always secretly not want to talk about. We'll learn at the surface, but until black people and white people deal with, we was never treated after coming out of slavery, we will pass on this thing generation after generation and abuse our women and abuse our children.
Okay, thank you. And I believe the term for that in the literature now is epigenesis. So there is quite a bit of study on that, including a number of animal research studies. So it's certainly fascinating, and we know that slavery has had a damning effect. Thank you for your question. Anybody on the panel want to respond?
Hi, my name is Kennedy Stevens. I had a
Okay.
question for Mr. Garlock and for Miss Mary. Miss Mary, you said that growing up it was no communication and even your best friend didn't know. Even when you was 13, do you think you would have still been able to talk about it like anytime with anybody, even growing up? Do you think you would have just been able and comfortable enough to even talk about it?
No, I think for myself, I suppressed it. Once I had my son, I feel no one came to me to talk to me about it, so I feel no one cared. So I suppressed it. So I didn't talk to my mom, my dad. My little sister didn't even know. So no one in my family really knew besides the ones that, knew. But I had an aunt that didn't even know. So I suppressed everything. I didn't talk to no one-on-one. I dealt with everything on my own. So I became a person that kept everything to herself. I made sure I just kept everything to myself. So no, I kept everything.
And Mr. Garlock, you said that in the prison system that you didn't have a lot of resources. Even when you had told them, like you said, nobody knew during your childhood, and then when you got arrested, that's when you decided to open up and tell your story. With that, what is some advice that you can give to juveniles that have went through that experience that need the right resources in jail to at least get to that process of starting to heal and find themselves again?
Well, I mean, I don't really think that our criminal legal system is set up and provide opportunities for that. I wish that all of our juvenile and prisons actually were about rehabilitation, were about providing resources to help people heal. If they're in a place where they do have some type of counselor that they can talk to, that's going to be really beneficial. If they don't, I'd say the main thing is really having their village when they get out of prison. So I always talk about that, there's an African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. My thought process on that is it also takes a village for somebody coming home from prison to succeed. So if they have that village when they get out, that's going to help them heal, and then they're going to be able to find a counselor who they can work through all of their trauma and other issues with. Yep.
Okay, and our time is upon us, so a few closing comments. So we heard from the panelists a need to educate our children and parents on things like recognizing grooming, danger. We need to have conversations about things, as the gentleman here mentioned, traumatic things that intergenerationally we may be passing on. Keeps us from asking questions, talking to our children like we should be. So parents ask questions. And a caution, when our children are communicating with us, adults, let's try to hold our reaction, not get so angry so they don't want to tell us anything ever again. because we react so strongly, and I'm talking to myself. Careful about being so reactionary when we hear these things. So we need to be educated. We need to share the education. We need to communicate. We need to deal with trauma. We need to talk. And we need to know that juveniles offend, women offend. Look, if I don't know you, I don't know that you're not a sex offender. So we need to be careful about easily trusting people to be around our children. Just because they're educated or they seem nice and friendly and kind, we don't know that they're not a sex offender. And we heard that we need multi-systemic intervention oftentimes for families who are impacted by trauma. There's usually a family thing involved in peeling the onion so that we deal with our trauma so we don't continue to pass on trauma. And therapy takes time. It's not a quick fix. It takes time when these things happen. The comment was made, trauma to prison pipeline, asking the right question, everybody working with youth being trauma informed. So we asked the young people, what happened to you? Like that young lady who was screaming the 4-letter word at her mother. What happened to you? Because normally people don't do that. So what happened to you? And we've heard that schools need to be safe places for people, and that all youth serving, I mentioned that all youth serving institutions need attention. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I know we've only just scratched the surface on a very important topic. We'll need to continue the conversation. Please join me in a round of applause to thank our panelists, and thank you for being here today. And to folks who helped to organize the program, Dr. Fraser Kwasi, Mr. Alberto Alfredo, Mr. Joey Longer, Ms. Sandy Sigmund, Mr. Alfred Clark. These are people who worked behind the scenes to make the program work today. Thank you also. Please, let us go forth and do good. Thank you so much. It was just like a start. I'm sorry.